All right, so real quick, good morning and welcome back. Today, I want to talk about something real quick. One, I want to talk about drugs versus medicine. I'll be talking about sources of drugs and then traditional medicine versus herbal medicine. So let's jump right into it. What are drugs? What are drugs? Essentially, what are drugs? It's a common sight and a common view way to see people and hear people talk about I want to buy drugs. They walk into the pharmacy to tell you, I want to buy drugs. I want to buy these drugs. I have drug prescriptions and all that. Are you sure what you are coming to the pharmacy to buy is actually a drug or drugs, as the case may be, and not medicine? So let's get to find out. Now, when you talk about drug, a drug is actually a chemical substance that alters the way the body functions, right? In science, the way the body functions is what we call physiology. So a chemical substance that alters the physiology of the body is what we call drug. This chemical substance is actually and always an active ingredient. In pharmacy, we call it active pharmaceutical ingredient, API. It is the API that is responsible for lowering of blood pressure, that is responsible for killing of microorganisms or inhibiting the growth of microorganisms, that is responsible for relieving of pain. So that active ingredient is what we call a drug. Now, when you talk about medicine, medicine is an active ingredient plus a bunch of other inactive ingredients called an excipient, right? Now, so medicine is an active ingredient or API plus excipients. Now, these excipients can be, it can be flavoring agents, to improve the taste, like in children medicine. In children medicine, it can be a binder just to bind the drugs together. It can be a filler or a diluent that influence, the shape of the drug. It can be a preservative that prevent the drug from going bad, right? So these are excipients. So a drug plus an excipient is what we call medicine. Only excipient is only active pharmaceutical product or pharmaceutical ingredient is what we call drug. So you can liken it like that. A drug is the car engine, why the whole car is the medicine. So the whole car and the engine plus the wheels plus the steerings plus the seats plus the AC, just to facilitate the free movement of the car, is what we call medicine. So medicine is that ready-made drug or ready-made preparation you go to the pharmacy to buy. So actually what you go to the pharmacy to buy is not a drug, it is a medicine or medication. Do you understand me? So it's good to make that clarification that a drug is that active pharmaceutical ingredient, right? That alters the way the body functions. And then we talk about medicine, it is the active pharmaceutical ingredients plus other inactive ingredients that facilitate the safe movement and intake of the drug. Do you understand? So medicine is that ready-made drug you go to the pharmacy to buy. Why that thing that changes the physiology of the body is what we call a drug. That being said, let's jump right to sources of drugs. Where do drugs come from? Drugs, where do they come from? Classically, drug can come from a natural source or natural sources and from synthetic sources, right? When we talk about natural sources, they are straight from nature. And plant is part of the natural source. Animal, microorganisms. Do you understand? They are all examples of what? Natural sources. So drug can actually come from plants, they can come from animal, it can come from microorganisms, right? And they can equally come from the lab. They can be synthesized in the lab, or they can be tweaked with, or the natural substance can be tweaked with the chemical substance to produce a desired formulation, right? We call it combinatorial chemistry. So let's turn to the natural sources of drugs. We talk about plants. There are so many drugs that originally came from plants. Do you understand? So when we talk about the Madagascar periwinkle plant was the original source of vincristine vinplastin. Vincristine vinplastin is used for the treatment of cancer. When we talk about opium poppy was the original source of what we call morphine or codeine. We talk about cinchona bark. Cinchona bark was the source of malaria fighting quinine, right? We talk about aspirin. Aspirin we use for inflammation, we use to reduce pain. The aspirin originally came from white willow bark plants, right? So there are so many other drugs that originally came from plants. What about digitalis? Digitalis we use for the proper functioning of the heart actually came from a foxglove plant, what we call digitalis lanata, right? So these are all sources of drugs from what? Plant source. Again, what about animal source? A bunch of drugs, bunch of other drugs actually came from animal. You talk about the insulin. Initial insulin actually came from pig and cow pancreas, right? We talk about the captopril we use today for the management of high blood pressure was actually inspired by a pit viper venom. It came from snake. We talk about Vitados. Vitados used for the treatment of cancer. Yeah, I think it was unveiled so many years ago in Cuba. I was in Cuba when Vitados was unveiled. It actually came from a scorpion venom. So these are some of the drugs we get from animal source. What about microorganisms? You talk about the antibiotic revolution, right? That in 1929 or 1928, Alexander Fleming actually discovered penicillin, and penicillin changed the way medicine, was practiced. It saved so many lives. Penicillin was used for the treatment of infections, and there are some other antibiotics we got from penicillin. By the way, came from um, a fungus called Penicillium notatum. We have actinomycetes as the source of streptomycin and actinomycin. They all came from actinomycetes. They are microorganisms. So we've talked about drug source from plants, from animal, from microorganisms. So let's go back to the synthetic drugs, right? Drug can be synthesized in the lab using chemicals, or they can use the natural source, tweak it with an artificial source to get a desired goal, like your acetaminophen, your ibuprofen. They are all synthetically engineered, right? Or synthetically formulated. We here again, we can synthesize drugs from genetic engineering. Like a human gene can be inserted into, a bacterium or a cell just to produce human proteins that we can use as drugs. Like most of the human insulin we have today, they are genetically engineered and they actually came from this source, right? So these are some of the sources of drugs. Now, that being said, let's talk about another interesting thing, herbal medicine and traditional medicine. It's very common to see young people say, I don't want herbal medicine. I don't want traditional medicine. Anything traditional medicine, I don't want. But wait a minute. There's a difference between traditional medicine and herbal medicine, right? Let's jump right into it. Let's unfold it and you know it. When we talk about traditional medicine, it is an ancient and complex type of medicine that is passed down through cultures, through generations. The medicine that is peculiar or particular to a culture. Like in India, we have what we call Ayurveda. Ayurveda is their own traditional medicine that is peculiar to Indians. In China, we have what we call the TCM, the traditional Chinese medicine. It is what is common to the Chinese. In Africa, we have the African traditional practices. It is what is common to us. So when you go for yoga, when you go for meditation, when you go for deep massage, when you go for sauna, when you go for hydrotherapy, when you go for spiritual cleansing, when you go for acupuncture, they are all forms of traditional medicine. Now, when we talk about herbal medicine, they are basically from herbs, right? It can be from the leaves, it can be from the roots, it can be from the bark. The use of herbs for the prevention, treatment, management of an illness is what we call herbal medicine. So you see, there's a difference between herbal medicine and traditional medicine. Herbal medicine is a component of a traditional medicine, right? So if you are using herb to treat, it may be part of your culture, part of the traditional medicine for you to use herb, right? So you see, we have learned something today. We've talked about traditional medicine and herbal medicine, right? So an ancient practice that is peculiar to a particular culture, we call it traditional medicine. While the use of herbs alone solely is what we call herbal medicine. So today I've talked about drugs as active substances that change the way the body functions, right? And medicine is just the whole package, the ready drug that you get from the pharmacy. This drug you go to the pharmacy to buy is what we call medicine. So anytime you walk into the pharmacy, what you are going to ask for is not drug, but medications or medicine, right? So we've talked about sources of drugs, and then we talked about traditional medicine and herbal medicine. If you like this video, say something. Give it a thumbs up, criticize me, and we see how we move forward.